The centuries roll backward. The rivers swell again, brown and heavy with silt, spilling across a vast and sun-baked plain. The air is thick, warm, carrying the faint scent of wet clay and reed smoke. Mud brick walls rise from the earth, not as ruins but whole and towering, their surfaces still pale under a relentless sun. This is Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, and what stretches before us now is nothing less than the birthplace of civilization itself. Long before Egypt raised its first pyramid, long before Greece imagined democracy, a people settled these floodplains around 5,400 years before the Common Era. They were the Ubaid, and they dug the first irrigation canals with their bare hands, turning marshland into the most productive farmland the ancient world had ever known. From that act of defiance against nature, everything followed. Cities rose, temples climbed towards the heavens, and on small tablets of wet river clay, pressed with the edge of a cut reed, human beings wrote their first words. History did not begin as metaphor. It began here as documented fact. What unfolds across this series is the complete story of that extraordinary experiment. We will journey from the very first reed huts built on the southern marshes through the explosive growth of Uruk, a city of 40,000 souls and the largest settlement on earth by 3,200 before the Common Era. We will witness the rise of Sargon of Akkad, a foundling pulled from the river who forged the world's first empire. We will stand before the black diorite stele of Hammurabi, 2¼ meters tall, inscribed with 282 laws that shaped the very concept of justice. We will walk the corridors of Ashurbanipal's great library at Nineveh, where over 30,000 cuneiform tablets preserved the wisdom of 1,000 years, and we will pass through the Ishtar Gate of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, its glazed blue bricks shimmering with golden bulls and serpent dragons, the most magnificent entrance to the most magnificent city the ancient world had ever seen. But this is not only a story of kings and conquerors. We will explore how ordinary people lived, what they ate, how they brewed the barley beer they drank through long reed straws, how mothers raised children and schoolboys struggled to master the wedge-shaped script. We will trace the trade routes that brought lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan and copper from the shores of Oman. We will uncover how Babylonian astronomers tracked the planets with astonishing precision and gave us the 60-minute hour and the 360-degree circle. And we will witness the fall. Empire after empire carried the seeds of its own collapse, overextension, drought, revolt, and invasion, until the Persian king Cyrus the Great entered Babylon through open gates in 539 before the Common Era, ending Mesopotamian independence forever. The canals silted, the cities crumbled, the desert reclaimed what irrigation had built. Yet the legacy never vanished. Every time a person reads written text, follows a legal code, or gazes at a mapped constellation, they are inheriting gifts from this very land. This is not simply a history lesson. This is a complete journey through time, from origins to legacy, spanning nearly 5,000 years of human ambition, creativity, and resilience. By the end, the dust and silence of these ruins will speak with voices you will never forget. If you find yourself drawn to these complete journeys through ancient civilizations, please subscribe so you do not miss our next exploration. Each week, we bring you the full story of a lost world, told with the depth and wonder it deserves. Now, let us begin our journey, here, where the rivers meet the plain, where the reeds bend in the wind, and where humanity first dared to build something that would outlast the ages. 2 rivers descend from the mountains of eastern Anatolia, carving separate paths through rock and steppe before spilling onto a vast, flat plain in what is now southern Iraq. The Tigris, swifter and more violent, rushes southeast along the foothills of the Zagros. The Euphrates, broader and slower, bends westward through the Syrian desert before curving back to meet its twin. Between them stretches a corridor of alluvial earth, silt carried down from highland valleys over millions of years and deposited in layers so deep and so rich that a single season's planting can yield 30 times the seed sown. This is the land the Greeks will one day call Mesopotamia, the land between 2 rivers. The plain itself holds almost nothing a civilization needs. There is no stone for building, no metal ore, no timber tall enough for roofing. Rainfall in the south barely reaches 15 centimeters a year, far too little for agriculture. Summer temperatures climb past 50 degrees. The rivers flood unpredictably, sometimes drowning entire settlements, sometimes shifting course and abandoning fields to cracked, salt-crusted waste. It is, by nearly every measure, a hostile landscape. And yet the soil changes everything. That alluvial silt, when water reaches it, becomes the most productive farmland in the ancient world. The challenge is control, channeling floodwater where it is needed, draining it where it threatens. Sometime around 5,400 years before the Common Era, a people now called the Ubaid begin to solve this problem. At sites like Tel al-Ubaid and Eridu, near the marshy edges of the southern plain, small communities take shape. They dig shallow irrigation ditches by hand, guiding river water into fields of emmer wheat and barley. They harvest the towering kasab reeds that grow thick along the waterways, bundling them into arching frameworks and weaving reed mats over them to create houses, structures remarkably similar to those still built by the marsh Arabs of southern Iraq thousands of years later. Where reeds are insufficient, they pack river mud into bricks and dry them in the brutal sun, producing the first mud brick architecture. These are not nomads pausing between migrations. The presence of communal granaries, large mud brick storage facilities designed to hold surplus grain through lean months, reveals a commitment to place. Surplus grain means not everyone must farm. Some can make pottery, and Ubaid pottery is distinctive. Buff-colored clay, painted with dark geometric patterns, produced in quantities large enough to trade across hundreds of kilometers. Ubaid ceramics appear at sites from the Persian Gulf coast to northern Syria, evidence of a shared cultural identity spreading across the entire Mesopotamian plain. The flat, treeless horizon stretches unbroken in every direction. There are no natural boundaries, no defensible hills, no forests to limit movement. Communities must cooperate or perish, sharing water, maintaining canals, storing grain collectively. The landscape itself demands organization. It demands planning across seasons, coordination among families, and decisions about who receives water and when. Eridu, resting on a low mound at the edge of the southern marshes, holds a special place. Later Sumerian tradition will remember it as the first city, the place where kingship descended from heaven. Archaeological excavation reveals that by this period, Eridu already contains a small shrine, a simple mud brick room with an offering table and traces of burned fish bones, gifts to whatever power the Ubaid people believe, dwells in the sweet groundwater rising beneath their feet. The rivers continue their slow work, depositing fresh silt with every flood, extending the delta further into the Persian Gulf. The land itself is still being made. And upon this unfinished earth, in reed houses beside hand-dug canals, amid stored grain and painted pottery, the foundations of something unprecedented are being laid, not by grand design, but by the accumulated weight of 10,000 daily decisions to stay, to dig, to plant, to build. Eridu stands alone on the southern edge of the habitable world, where marshland meets open water and the horizon dissolves into haze. It is the oldest continuously occupied sacred site in Mesopotamia, and what begins here around 5,400 years before the Common Era as a single room of mud brick, barely 2 meters square, will grow across 14 centuries into a monumental temple platform visible for kilometers across the flat alluvial plain. The earliest shrine is almost humble enough to miss. A small rectangular chamber, its walls of sun-dried mud brick barely reaching shoulder height, contains a niche set into one wall and a low offering table at its center. Scattered around the base of this table lie fish bones, cleaned and deliberately placed, offerings to a presence the Ubaid settlers associate with the fresh water that rises from underground springs at this precise location. The god who will later be known as Enki, lord of the subterranean sweet waters and keeper of divine wisdom, already draws worship here in these earliest centuries, though the name itself belongs to a later age. What makes Eridu extraordinary is not any single structure, but the relentless act of rebuilding. When one temple deteriorates or grows too small for the community's ambitions, it is not demolished. Instead, its walls are carefully filled with clean sand and mud brick rubble, creating a raised platform upon which a new, larger temple is constructed. Archaeologists working at the site in the 1940s and 50s under Fuad Safar and Seton Lloyd excavated 18 successive temple levels, each sealed beneath the next, forming a stratigraphic record of continuous worship spanning roughly 1,500 years. The progression reveals a society growing in confidence and organizational capacity. The earliest levels contain simple one-room shrines. By the middle phases, the temples expand to include multiple chambers arranged around a central hall with a recessed niche, the architectural form that will become the standard Mesopotamian temple plan for millennia. Buttressed exterior walls create rhythmic patterns of light and shadow across mud brick facades. The offering tables grow more elaborate. Fish bones remain constant through nearly every level, a persistent thread of devotion linking the first settlers to their distant descendants. Painted Ubaid pottery appears throughout these layers, buff-colored vessels decorated with bold geometric patterns in dark brown or black paint. Chevrons, cross-hatching, and sweeping curves adorn bowls and jars, placed as grave goods and temple offerings alike. The consistency of these designs across hundreds of kilometers, from the Persian Gulf Coast to sites in northern Mesopotamia, speaks to a shared cultural identity, radiating outward from settlements like Eridu. By roughly 4,500 years before the Common Era, the temple at Eridu sits atop a platform several meters above the surrounding plain, an artificial mountain in a land without natural hills. The act of elevation is deliberate and symbolic. The sacred space must rise above the mundane world, closer to whatever divine realm the builders imagine above them. This impulse, to raise the house of the god above the houses of mortals, contains the architectural seed of the ziggurat, though that towering form lies more than 1,000 years in the future. The community sustaining this temple complex depends on irrigation agriculture and fishing, supplemented by date cultivation and animal husbandry. Surplus food production frees certain individuals from subsistence labor, allowing the emergence of specialized roles: priests who tend the shrine, craftspeople who produce the painted pottery, builders who plan and execute each successive reconstruction. The temple itself functions as an economic node, collecting offerings and redistributing resources, establishing a pattern of institutional authority that will define Mesopotamian civilization. Eridu holds a unique place in later Sumerian memory. The Sumerian king list names it as the first city to receive kingship when it descended from heaven. Long after its political importance fades, its sacred reputation endures. The temple sequence buried beneath its sands preserves something remarkable, not merely architecture, but evidence of an idea taking root. The conviction that certain places belong to powers greater than human beings, and that those powers require houses built by human hands, maintained by human labor, and honored by human devotion, generation after generation, each building upon the work of the last. Something unprecedented is happening on the alluvial plain. By 4,000 years before the Common Era, the settlement at Uruk begins to swell beyond anything the ancient world has witnessed. What was once a modest cluster of mud brick structures along a branch of the Euphrates enters a period of transformation so rapid, so total, that archaeologists have given it a name reserved for only the most consequential shifts in human history: a revolution. The forces driving this expansion are rooted in the earth itself. Generations of canal building have turned the surrounding floodplain into an agricultural engine of extraordinary productivity. Barley harvests yield surpluses far exceeding what any single community can consume. Date palms line the waterways in dense groves, their fruit providing calories, their timber providing building material. This abundance does not merely feed people, it frees them. For the first time, large numbers of human beings can dedicate their lives to work that has nothing to do with growing food. Workshops multiply across the expanding settlement. Potters abandon the slow, hand-building techniques of earlier centuries and adopt the fast wheel, producing standardized vessels at speeds previously unimaginable. The beveled rim bowl, a crude, mass-produced container likely used to measure grain rations, appears in staggering quantities, evidence of a centralized system distributing food to laborers. Weavers, leatherworkers, stonecutters, and metallurgists cluster in specialized quarters. Each craft demands apprenticeship, tools, and raw materials imported from distant lands. And Uruk reaches outward. Obsidian arrives from Anatolia. Copper comes from the highlands of modern Iran and Oman. Timber, absent from the treeless plain, is floated downriver from northern forests. Carnelian and lapis lazuli travel thousands of kilometers along trade routes, stretching to the Indus Valley and the mountains of Afghanistan. Uruk is not merely consuming these goods, it is projecting its culture outward. Uruk-style pottery, architecture, and administrative tools appear at sites across Upper Mesopotamia, Syria, and southeastern Anatolia. Colonial outposts or trading stations that extend the city's commercial reach across the ancient Near East. At the heart of this growing metropolis rise two monumental complexes: the Anu Ziggurat, a towering mud-brick platform dedicated to the sky god, dominates the western sector, its white temple perched at the summit, its walls coated in gleaming gypsum plaster visible for kilometers across the flat terrain. To the east, the Iana precinct sprawls across an enormous area, its buildings decorated with extraordinary cone mosaics, tens of thousands of small clay cones, their ends dipped in red, black, and white pigment, pressed into wet plaster to create geometric patterns of dazzling complexity. The Iana district functions simultaneously as temple, warehouse, and administrative headquarters, its courtyards bustling with officials managing the flow of goods, labor, and ritual obligations. By 3,200 years before the Common Era, Uruk covers approximately 2.5 square kilometers. An estimated 40,000 people live within and around its mud brick walls, making it the largest human settlement on the face of the earth. Nothing comparable exists anywhere, not in Egypt, not in the Indus Valley, not in China. The social complexity required to sustain such a population demands new systems of organization. Hierarchies deepen. Administrators emerge as a distinct class, their authority derived not from kinship, but from institutional roles within the temple economy. The sheer volume of transactions flowing through the Iana precinct, grain collected, rations distributed, labor assigned, trade goods inventoried, is pushing the limits of human memory. Something new is needed, a technology capable of recording, storing, and retrieving information beyond what any single mind can hold. The pressure is building in the clay beneath the administrators' hands, in the tokens they count, and the seals they press. Uruk has created the conditions that will demand humanity's most transformative invention. Small clay objects, no larger than a thumbnail, hold the secret. They are cones, spheres, discs, and cylinders, geometric shapes molded from river clay and dried in the sun. Each one represents a quantity of something real. A small cone stands for a measure of barley. A sphere marks a larger unit. A flat disc counts an animal. These tokens have circulated across Mesopotamian settlements for thousands of years, passed between hands to track debts and deliveries. But by 3400 before the Common Era, the administrators of Uruk face a problem the tokens alone cannot solve. The temple economy has grown too vast, the transactions too numerous, the categories too complex for loose clay pieces rattling in baskets. The first solution is elegant. Administrators gather the relevant tokens, place them inside a hollow clay ball, a bulla, and seal the wet surface with a cylinder seal bearing the mark of the responsible official. The bulla becomes a sealed envelope of data, tamper-proof and portable. But there is an immediate flaw. To verify the contents, one must break the bulla open, destroying the record. So a second innovation follows. Before sealing the tokens inside, the administrator presses each one into the soft outer surface of the bulla, leaving an impression. Now the exterior displays what the interior contains. The information exists in two forms simultaneously: the physical tokens within and their images without. Then comes the leap. If the impressions on the outside carry all the necessary information, the tokens inside become redundant. The hollow ball flattens into a solid tablet. The impressions become marks deliberately inscribed into wet clay with a cut reed. A stylus replaces the token. Representation replaces the thing itself. This is the birth of writing. The earliest tablets from the Iana precinct at Uruk, dating to roughly 3,400 to 3,200 before the Common Era, bear no poetry, no prayers, No royal proclamations. They are lists, quantities of grain received, numbers of sheep transferred, rations of beer allocated to laborers. The signs are pictographic, a simplified drawing of a head of barley, a schematic ox, a bowl indicating a portion of food. Each tablet is small enough to fit in one hand, its surface divided into boxes, each box containing a sign and a number. Hundreds of these archaic tablets survive, recovered from refuse deposits where they were discarded after their administrative purpose expired. The system expands rapidly. Within 2 centuries, the repertoire grows to over 700 distinct signs. Some remain pictographic, but others begin to shift. A sign originally depicting a foot comes to represent the concept of walking, then the verb to go, then the syllable used to pronounce that verb. Meaning detaches from image. The signs grow abstract, their curves straightening into the wedge-shaped impressions that give cuneiform its name, from the Latin cunus, meaning wedge. By 3000 before the Common Era, the reed stylus is pressed at angles into soft clay, producing combinations of short strokes rather than drawn pictures. Writing has crossed from visual representation into a system capable of encoding spoken language itself. Storage rooms in the temple district fill with tablets, organized by subject and date. Scribes emerge as a professional class, their skills acquired through years of training. The technology spreads outward from Uruk to other cities across the plain. What began as a bookkeeping shortcut becomes the foundation of recorded history. Every law, every treaty, every poem, every astronomical observation that will follow across 3,000 years of Mesopotamian civilization rests upon these first hesitant marks, pressed into wet river clay by anonymous hands solving an accountant's problem. By 2,900 years before the Common Era, the alluvial plain has fractured into a constellation of rival powers. The cities that once shared a common culture of temple worship and cuneiform record-keeping now stand behind fortified walls, each claiming supremacy, each guarding its irrigated fields with armies of bronze-armed men. Southern Mesopotamia enters the age the modern world calls the early dynastic period, and the landscape transforms into a patchwork of competing kingdoms separated by canals, levees, and contested borderlands. Kish dominates the northern reaches of Sumer, its kings claiming a prestige so ancient that later tradition places its dynasty first after the Great Flood. Uruk retains its monumental grandeur, its temples still drawing pilgrims, but political authority now resides in palace complexes as much as sacred precincts. Ur rises along the western bank of the Euphrates near the coast, its harbour connecting the southern plain to maritime trade routes, reaching Dilmun in the Persian Gulf. Lagash and its sister city Girsu control rich agricultural territory in the east. Umma presses against Lagash from the northwest. Nippur, sacred city of the god Enlil, holds a unique position. No single dynasty controls it permanently, yet every ruler who seeks legitimacy must secure its blessing. Each city is governed by a lugal, a title meaning great man, or an ensi, a governor who rules under divine sanction. These rulers commission mud brick palaces with columned courtyards, audience halls where disputes are settled and tribute received. They stamp cylinder seals bearing their names into clay, marking ownership and authority. They dedicate votive statues in temple sanctuaries, wide-eyed figures carved from gypsum and alabaster, hands clasped in eternal prayer, standing in perpetual devotion before the gods who grant them power. The temples themselves function as vast economic institutions. They own farmland, employ laborers, manage herds of cattle and flocks of sheep, and distribute rations of barley and wool. Scribes working in temple archives track every transaction, bushels of grain harvested, jars of oil pressed, days of labor owed. The temple of Ningirsu at Girsu and the temple of Inanna at Uruk operate as centers of production and redistribution, binding entire populations into networks of obligation and sustenance. But the wealth of irrigated land breeds conflict. The border between Lagash and Umma, a fertile tract called the Guedena, becomes the site of one of history's earliest documented territorial wars. Generation after generation, the two cities clash over this strip of farmland, each inscribing its version of events on stone monuments and clay tablets. The conflict persists across reigns, inherited like a blood debt, reshaping alliances and draining resources. Warfare itself takes organized form. Soldiers march in tight phalanx formations, shields overlapping, copper-tipped spears leveled forward. They wear helmets of hammered copper and carry socketed axes designed to penetrate leather armor. Four-wheeled battle carts drawn by onagers, wild asses of the steppe, carry commanders into the fray. The stele of the vultures, erected by Eannatum of Lagash to commemorate his victory over Umma, depicts these formations in carved relief, ranks of helmeted warriors trampling fallen enemies while vultures carry away the dead. A clay prism known as the Sumerian King List attempts to impose order on this fractured world, recording dynasties at Kish, Uruk, and other cities in sequence, as though kingship passes from one city to another by divine will. In reality, multiple dynasties rule simultaneously, their territories overlapping, their claims competing. The King List is not history but ideology, an argument that legitimate authority flows in a single unbroken line from the gods to one chosen city at a time. Beneath the rivalries, a shared civilization persists. The same cuneiform script records transactions in every city. The same pantheon receives offerings. The same irrigation technology sustains life. But political unity remains elusive. The plain is too fertile, the cities too proud, the stakes too high. Each walled capital stands as a world unto itself, its ziggurat platform rising above mud-brick houses, its canals threading outward through fields of barley and emmer wheat, its king gazing across the flat horizon toward rival walls shimmering in the heat. The dead do not rest quietly at They descend into the earth adorned in gold, crowned with flowers hammered from precious metal, accompanied by servants who follow them into darkness. Between 2600 and 2450 before the Common Era, the cemetery that sprawls beyond the sacred precinct of the moon, God Nana receives approximately 1,850 burials. Most are modest, a body wrapped in reed matting, a few clay vessels, perhaps a copper pin. But 16 graves are different. These are the royal tombs, and what lies within them overturns every assumption about the wealth and ritual complexity of early Sumerian society. The richest belongs to a woman. Her name, preserved on a cylinder seal of lapis lazuli found near her shoulder, is Puabi. She holds the title Nin, a word meaning queen or lady of high rank. Her body rests on a wooden bier inside a vaulted stone chamber, and upon her head sits a headdress of staggering craftsmanship. Golden leaves, willow-shaped, layered in cascading tiers alongside rosettes and ribbons of hammered gold. the entire assemblage weighing nearly 1 kilogram. Strings of carnelian, lapis lazuli, and gold beads drape across her chest in elaborate patterns. Gold rings encircle her fingers. A golden cup rests near her hand. But the headdress is not the most astonishing discovery. Outside the stone chamber, in the sloping ramp leading down to the tomb, the excavation reveals orderly rows of human remains, attendants, soldiers, musicians, laid out with care, their bodies arranged as if they had simply lain down and died. Some of the women wear simpler versions of the golden headdresses. Grooms lie beside the skeletons of oxen still yoked to wooden sledges. Court musicians rest with their instruments, including lyres of extraordinary beauty, their sound boxes decorated with bull heads fashioned from gold and lapis lazuli, their inlaid panels depicting animals performing human tasks. Among the treasures recovered from the cemetery, 2 objects capture the full spectrum of Sumerian artistic achievement. The first is a small sculpture known as the ram in a thicket, a goat standing upright on its hind legs, forelegs resting on the branches of a flowering tree, its body covered in gold leaf, its fleece rendered in carved shell and lapis lazuli, mounted on a base of silver. The second is the standard of Ur, a hollow wooden box inlaid with mosaic panels of shell, red limestone, and lapis lazuli depicting 2 narratives, one side showing war, with chariots trampling enemies and soldiers presenting captives to a king, the other showing peace, with figures carrying goods to a banquet where a ruler sits drinking while a musician plays a bull lyre. The materials themselves tell a story of reach and ambition. Gold arrives from distant sources, possibly Egypt or Anatolia. Lapis lazuli travels over 2,500 kilometers from the mines of Badakhshan in northeastern Afghanistan. Carnelian comes from the Indus Valley or the Iranian Plateau. Copper originates in Oman or the Zagros Highlands. Ur, sitting near the head of the Persian Gulf, commands trade routes that stretch across the known world, and the cemetery proves that this wealth concentrates at the summit of a sharply stratified society. The mass burials pose questions that archaeology cannot fully answer. The attendants show no signs of violence or struggle. Some scholars suggest they consumed a poison willingly, following their sovereign into the afterlife as an act of devotion or obligation. The careful arrangement of bodies, the presence of cosmetic kits and jewelry on the attendants, the musicians positioned with instruments ready to play, all suggest a choreographed ritual, a final ceremony enacted at the mouth of the tomb before the earth sealed it shut. What the royal tombs reveal is a society where power, religion, art, and death intertwine completely. The craftsmanship demands specialists working exclusively in gold, in stone cutting, in inlay, artisans whose skill rivals anything produced for millennia afterward. The ritual demands a theology in which the boundary between life and death is permeable, where the afterlife requires the same retinue, the same music, the same splendor as the court above ground. Beneath the flat, sun-scorched plain of southern Mesopotamia, buried under centuries of silt and ruin, the tombs of Ur preserve a world of astonishing beauty and unsettling devotion. The world of Sumerian city-states, with its fractured rivalries and competing kings, is about to be swept aside by a single man whose origins remain half-shrouded in legend. Around 2334 before the Common Era, a figure emerges from the region of Akkad in central Mesopotamia, a land where Semitic-speaking peoples have lived alongside Sumerians for centuries, sharing the same irrigation canals, the same cuneiform script, but speaking a different tongue. His birth name is Sharukin, meaning the true king, though history remembers him as Sargon of Akkad. Later tradition preserves a story of his infancy. A mother who could not keep him, a basket of rushes sealed with bitumen, a river carrying a child toward an unknown fate. A water drawer named Aki finds the basket and raises the boy as his own. Whether historical memory or royal propaganda crafted to legitimize an outsider's claim to power, the legend endures on cuneiform tablets copied for more than 1,000 years. Sargon rises first as cupbearer to the king of Kish, a position of intimate access to royal authority. From this proximity to power, he seizes power itself, establishing a new capital called Akkad, or Agade. The city's precise location has never been found. No archaeologist has uncovered its walls, its temples, its palace foundations. Yet ancient texts describe it as a place of extraordinary wealth, a hub where goods flow from every direction. Cedar logs floated down the Euphrates from distant mountain forests, copper ingots arriving from the shores of Margan across the Persian Gulf, caravans bearing lapis lazuli from the mines of Badakhshan in distant Afghanistan. From Akkad, Sargon launches a series of military campaigns that shatter the old order entirely. His primary target is Lugalzagesi, the king of Uruk, who has already unified much of Sumer under his own rule. Sargon defeats him, and later texts record that Lugalzagesi is brought to the gate of the temple of Enlil at Nippur in a neck stock, humiliated before the god who grants kingship. One by one, the ancient city-states fall, Lagash, Ummah. Sargon claims to wash his weapons in the lower sea, the Persian Gulf, a symbolic gesture marking dominion over the entire alluvial plain. But his ambitions reach far beyond Sumer. Akkadian armies march northwest along the Euphrates, campaigning into what is now Syria. Trade routes to the Mediterranean fall under imperial control. To the east, Akkadian authority extends into Elam, the highland civilization centered on modern southwestern Iran. For the first time in recorded history, a single political entity stretches across multiple geographic zones, encompassing different peoples, languages, and traditions. This is something new, not a city-state writ large, but an empire, a multi-ethnic domain held together by military force, administrative appointment, and the Akkadian language imposed as the tongue of governance. The instruments of this empire are visible in the archaeological record. Bronze weapons of standardized design equip Akkadian soldiers. Cylinder seals carved with scenes of combat and divine authority mark official documents. Akkadian governors replace local rulers in conquered cities. Daughter priestesses are installed in temples at Ur and elsewhere, binding religious authority to the ruling dynasty. Sargon reigns for approximately 55 years, an extraordinary span during which the political map of the ancient Near East is redrawn completely. The old Sumerian world of independent city-states, each jealously guarding its irrigated fields and patron deity, gives way to a centralized imperial vision. Trade intensifies. Akkadian becomes the lingua franca of diplomacy and commerce across the region. Art shifts toward naturalistic royal portraiture. A bronze head discovered at Nineveh, possibly depicting Sargon or his grandson, gazes outward with calm authority, its beard elaborately curled, its empty eye sockets once inlaid with precious stone. The capital of Akkad remains lost beneath the Iraqi plain, its mud brick walls dissolved back into the earth from which they were shaped. Yet the empire Sargon builds proves that human ambition can extend beyond the horizon of a single city, that diverse peoples can be bound under a single crown. It is a dangerous and transformative idea, one that every subsequent Mesopotamian ruler will either emulate or resist, but none will forget. Sargon's sons inherit an empire held together by force, and force is what they must immediately employ. Rimush, the second king of Akkad, faces revolts across Sumer within months of taking the throne around 2279 before the Common Era. The cities that submitted to his father now test the resolve of his successor. Rimush crushes the rebellions with documented brutality. Inscriptions record thousands slain, thousands more blinded and set to forced labor. His reign ends after perhaps 9 years, possibly by assassination at the hands of his own courtiers, their cylinder seals allegedly used as weapons to bludgeon him. Manishtushu follows, campaigning across the Persian Gulf to secure trade routes, purchasing vast tracts of land documented on a great stone obelisk. He too may die by palace conspiracy. The throne of Akkad is powerful but precarious, its succession stained with blood. Then comes Naram-Sin, grandson of Sargon, and the empire reaches its most extraordinary and dangerous peak. Ascending around 2254 before the Common Era, he rules for approximately 36 years, expanding Akkadian territory to its greatest extent. His armies campaign from the cedar forests of the Amanus Mountains to the shores of the Persian Gulf, from the highlands of Elam to the upper reaches of the Tigris. But it is not conquest alone that distinguishes him. Naram-Sin takes a step no Mesopotamian king has taken before. He declares himself a god. The horned crown, sacred symbol of divinity, reserved exclusively for the gods on cylinder seals and relief carvings, now appears upon his own head. His name is written with the divine determinative, the cuneiform sign that precedes the names of gods. A pink limestone stele, recovered from Susa where Elamite raiders carried it centuries later, depicts Naram-Sin ascending a mountain at the head of his troops, his figure towering above his soldiers, his gaze directed upward toward celestial symbols. He is no longer merely a king who serves the gods, he has become one. Yet the inscriptions also preserve a counter-narrative. A later literary composition known as the Curse of Akkad describes divine punishment falling upon the empire for Naram-Sin's alleged desecration of Enlil's temple at Nippur. Whether historical or theological invention, the text captures a Mesopotamian conviction that hubris invites catastrophe. Under Shar-Kali-Shari, Naram-Sin's successor reigning from around 2217 before the Common Era, the empire begins to fracture. Provinces break away. The Amorites press from the western steppe. The Gutians, mountain people from the Zagros ranges to the east, raid with increasing boldness. After Shar-Kali-Shari's death around 2193, the Sumerian king list records a haunting question. Who was king? Who was not king? Reflecting a period of anarchy where multiple claimants struggle for a disintegrating throne. Paleoclimate evidence drawn from ocean sediment cores in the Gulf of Oman reveals a dramatic increase in wind-borne dust beginning around 2200 before the Common Era, indicating severe aridification across the region. A drought lasting perhaps 3 centuries settles over northern Mesopotamia. Archaeological surveys show widespread abandonment of settlements across the rain-fed agricultural zone of the Habur Plains, the empire's northern breadbasket. The irrigation systems of the south continue to function, but cannot compensate for the collapse of northern grain production. Cities shrink, trade routes wither. The administrative apparatus that held diverse peoples under a single authority loses its capacity to collect, redistribute, and command. By 2154 before the Common Era, the Akkadian Empire has ceased to exist. Gutian chieftains exercised loose control over parts of Sumer and Akkad, though their authority remains fragmented and poorly documented. Dust storms sweep across abandoned settlements where mud-brick walls slowly dissolve back into the plain. The great experiment in universal kingship inaugurated by Sargon has lasted barely 2 centuries, yet the idea persists in memory, in literature, in the ambitions of every ruler who will follow. The dream that one king might hold the entire world between 2 rivers under a single crown, and the warning that even a god-king cannot command the reign. From the wreckage of Gutian occupation, a new order rises in the south. Around 2112 before the Common Era, a governor of Ur named Ur-Nammu seizes power, drives the Gutian chieftains from the lowlands, and declares himself king of Sumer and Akkad. The title is deliberate. It echoes Sargon's claim to universal sovereignty. Yet Ur-Nammu roots his legitimacy not in conquest alone, but in restoration. The renewal of canals choked with silt, the rebuilding of temples fallen to ruin, the return of order to a land that has known decades of fragmentation. The centerpiece of this renewal rises from the flat plain at Ur. The great ziggurat, dedicated to the moon god Nana, patron deity of the city, stands as a massive stepped platform of solid mud brick, its base measuring approximately 64 meters in length and 46 meters in width. 3 monumental staircases converge at the first terrace, their baked brick facades angled slightly inward to create an illusion of soaring height. The core consists of millions of sun-dried mud brick blocks, interlaced with layers of reed matting and bitumen to prevent moisture from cracking the structure apart. Drainage holes pierce the outer walls, channeling rainwater away from the vulnerable interior. This is engineering of extraordinary sophistication designed to endure millennia. And it does. But Ur-Nammu's most revolutionary achievement is not architectural. It is textual. His law code, inscribed on clay tablets and fragments of a stone stele, predates Hammurabi's famous laws by roughly 3 centuries. Where later codes prescribe physical mutilation, Ur-Nammu's laws frequently substitute monetary compensation. Fines measured in silver shekels replace severed hands. The code addresses assault, divorce, false accusation, agricultural disputes, and the treatment of slaves, establishing the principle that written, publicly declared law, not arbitrary royal decree, governs the resolution of conflict. The administrative machinery that supports this vision is staggering in its ambition. Under Ur-Nammu and his son Shulgi, who reigns for nearly half a century after his father's death in battle around 2095 before the Common Era, the third dynasty of Ur constructs the most centralized bureaucratic state the ancient world has yet produced. Tens of thousands of clay tablets survive from this period, an estimated 100,000 administrative documents recording every transaction the state oversees. Grain harvests are measured, livestock counted, labor gangs assigned, rations distributed, taxes collected. Scribes working in crowded archive rooms press their reed styluses into wet clay with meticulous precision, generating receipts, inventories, and correspondence that flow upward through a hierarchy of provincial governors to the royal court. Shulgi standardizes weights and measures across the realm, reforms the calendar, and establishes a network of messenger stations along royal roads connecting the provinces. Caravans arrive at Ur's harbor carrying copper, timber, and precious stones from Dilmun, the island trading hub in the Persian Gulf identified with modern Bahrain. The Ornamu Stele, a limestone monument now surviving only in fragments, depicts the king carrying building tools and making offerings before Nana, the ruler as servant of the gods, builder of sacred spaces, restorer of cosmic harmony. Yet this extraordinary apparatus of control contains its own fragility. The system depends on constant agricultural surplus, on canals maintained and harvests delivered, on peripheral provinces submitting without resistance. When pressure mounts from Elamite raiders to the east and Amorite semi-nomadic groups filtering in from the western steppe, the bureaucratic machine strains under demands it was never designed to absorb. The very precision of its record-keeping will document, tablet by tablet, the slow unraveling that follows. The unraveling begins not with a single catastrophe, but with a slow hemorrhage of authority, province by province, tablet by tablet. Under Ibbi-Sin, the fifth and final king of the third dynasty of Ur, the administrative machinery that once tracked every sheaf of barley and every hour of labor starts to record something else entirely, the progressive loss of control over the empire's periphery. Grain shipments from outlying provinces cease, governors stop sending tribute, the price of barley in Ur climbs to 60 times its normal level, a figure preserved in the economic tablets of the period with devastating clarity. From the east, Elamite raiding parties push deeper into the lowlands, striking at cities that once submitted without question to Ur's authority. From the west and north, Amorite semi-nomadic groups, speakers of a West Semitic language, herders of sheep and goats accustomed to life on the dry steppe, filter through gaps in the defensive lines. Ibbi-Sin orders the construction of fortification walls to hold them back, but the walls prove insufficient against a migration that is as much demographic as military. The Amorites do not arrive as a single conquering army. They drift in over decades, settling on the margins of irrigated farmland, gradually integrating into the urban fabric of Mesopotamian life. Ibbi-Sin's own generals begin to act independently. Ishbi-Erra, a man of Amorite origin serving as a military commander, seizes the city of Isin and declares himself king around 2017 before the Common Era. He controls the grain supply routes, and Ur, cut off from its agricultural hinterland, begins to starve. The great capital that Ur-Nammu built, with its towering ziggurat and its vast temple estates, shrinks behind its walls as the empire dissolves around it. Around 2004 before the Common Era, an Elamite army breaches those walls. The city is sacked. Ibbi-Sin is captured and taken in chains to the distant land of Elam, where he dies in captivity. The sacred statue of Nana, the moon god who had watched over Ur for centuries, is carried away as spoil. The destruction inspires one of the most haunting literary compositions in human history. The lamentation over the destruction of Ur, inscribed on clay tablets in the generations that follow, describes the city's agony in language of extraordinary power. Temples reduced to rubble, bodies lying unburied in the streets, the divine patrons of Ur weeping as they abandon their shrines. It is among the earliest known works of literature devoted entirely to mourning a civilization's fall. Yet Mesopotamia does not collapse into darkness. Instead, it fragments. The Isin-Lhasa period that follows sees a patchwork of competing kingdoms, Isin, Lhasa, Eshnunna, Mari, each claiming legitimacy, each vying for control of trade routes and irrigation networks. Ishbi-Erra at Isin styles himself as the rightful successor to Ur's dynasty, maintaining Sumerian literary and administrative traditions even as the spoken language shifts increasingly toward Akkadian. The Amorites, once outsiders camped in goat-hair tents on the steppe fringe, now sit on the thrones of ancient cities. Their tent encampments give way to mud-brick palaces. Their tribal leaders adopt cuneiform, worship Mesopotamian gods, and govern through the bureaucratic systems their predecessors created. At an obscure settlement on the Euphrates called Babylon, an Amorite dynasty establishes itself around 1894, before the Common Era, still minor, still unremarkable among the constellation of petty kingdoms. Nothing in the political landscape of that moment suggests that this small city will soon reshape the entire history of the ancient world. The ruins of Ur lie quiet under the southern sun, half buried in drifting sand, waiting for millennia to pass before anyone reads its lamentations again. For nearly a century, the Amorite dynasty at Babylon endures as one minor kingdom among many, hemmed in by stronger rivals at Lhasa to the south, Eshnunna to the east, Mari to the northwest, and the old Assyrian power at Ashur to the north. The city itself sits on the Euphrates in a modest stretch of irrigated farmland, its mud-brick walls unremarkable, its temples adequate but not grand. Then, around 1792 before the Common Era, a young king named Hammurabi ascends the throne, and everything begins to change. The transformation is not immediate. Hammurabi spends his first 3 decades on the throne in patient consolidation, strengthening canals, fortifying walls, and cultivating alliances with exquisite diplomatic care. Clay tablets recovered from the palace archives at Mari preserve his correspondence in extraordinary detail. Letters discussing troop deployments, grain shipments, intelligence reports on rival kings, and the precise management of irrigation channels upon which Babylonian agriculture depends. These are not the words of a reckless conqueror. They reveal a ruler of meticulous calculation, a man who understands that empires are built on infrastructure as much as armies. The military campaigns, when they come, arrive in a devastating sequence. In 1763, before the Common Era, Hammurabi turns against his former ally, Rim-Sin of Lhasa, besieging and conquering the southern kingdom that had dominated Lower Mesopotamia for decades. 2 years later, in 1761, he destroys Mari, razing the magnificent palace of Zimri-Lim, a structure containing over 300 rooms and some of the finest wall paintings in the ancient Near East. Eshnunna falls. The old Sumerian heartland submits. Within a span of fewer than 10 years, Babylon controls all of southern and central Mesopotamia, and Hammurabi stands as the most powerful ruler between the Persian Gulf and the Syrian steppe. The expanding walls of Babylon reflect this new supremacy. The city grows outward along both banks of the Euphrates, its neighborhoods dense with courtyard houses, its quays busy with river traffic carrying barley, wool, sesame oil, and dates. Groves of date palms line the canals stretching into the surrounding plain, their fronds casting latticed shadows over the water. Temples rise higher, their mud-brick platforms freshly whitewashed, their inner sanctums furnished with cult statues draped in fine garments. Yet Hammurabi's most enduring act is not conquest, but codification. A stele of black diorite, standing 2¼ meters tall, bears at its summit a carved relief of the king standing before Shamash, the sun god and divine patron of justice, who extends toward him the rod and ring symbolizing authority to govern. Below this image, carved in tight columns of Akkadian cuneiform, run 282 laws addressing property, commerce, family, labor, assault, and professional liability. The laws prescribe specific penalties scaled by the social status of victim and offender. They regulate the fees surgeons may charge, the obligations of builders whose structures collapse, the rights of women to inherit and divorce, the wages owed to hired laborers. This is not the first legal code in Mesopotamian history. Ur-Nammu's laws precede it by 3 centuries. But it is the most comprehensive, the most carefully organized, and the most deliberately monumental. Hammurabi intends it to outlast him. The stele is placed in public view, its prologue declaring that the strong shall not oppress the weak, that the orphan and the widow shall find justice. Whether these laws function as binding statutes or royal ideals remains debated, but their influence is beyond question. Copies circulate across Mesopotamia for more than 1,000 years, studied by scribes long after Babylon's first golden age fades. Hammurabi dies around 1750 before the Common Era. His empire, like Sargon's before it, begins to contract almost immediately under his successors. But the idea he inscribed in stone, that a king's greatest legacy is not territory but justice made visible and permanent, endures far beyond the crumbling of any wall. The stele stands in public view, but the society it governs is far more intricate than any single monument can convey. Across the old Babylonian period, thousands of clay tablets emerge from courtyard houses, temple archives, and marketplace stalls, each one a window into a world where law permeates every transaction, every marriage, every inheritance, every debt. 3 tiers define the social order. The awilum, the free citizen, stands at the apex. Landowners, merchants, high officials, and priests whose injuries demand the highest compensation and whose crimes carry the severest penalties. Below them, the mushkanum occupy an ambiguous middle ground, dependents of the palace or temple who hold usufruct rights to land they do not own, whose bodily injuries merit lesser fines paid in silver rather than reciprocal punishment. At the base, the wardom, slaves, exist as legal property, branded or marked, bought and sold in contracts that specify age, health, and origin. Yet even slaves possess limited rights under the code. A slave may conduct business, accumulate personal property, and purchase freedom. The children of a free man and a slave woman, if acknowledged by the father, inherit alongside freeborn siblings. Silver governs everything. Weighed in shekels of roughly 8 1/3 grams on bronze balance scales, it serves as the universal medium of exchange in a world without coinage. Merchants cluster in the Karum, the commercial district near the city gate, their transactions recorded on small clay tablets sealed inside clay envelopes. Interest rates on silver loans run at 20% annually. Grain loans carry 33%. A merchant who charges more violates the code and forfeits the debt entirely. Marriage in Old Babylon is a contractual affair. A man presents a bride price to the woman's father. The bride's family provides a dowry, often household goods, silver rings, slave women, that remains her property throughout the marriage. Divorce tablets specify the terms precisely. A woman whose husband neglects her may take her dowry and return to her father's house. A woman found at fault forfeits everything. Inheritance follows strict patrilineal lines, with the eldest son receiving a preferential share, though daughters who serve as temple priestesses receive their portion as a lifetime endowment rather than outright ownership. Medical practice falls under the code's scrutiny with startling specificity. A physician who successfully treats a severe wound on a free citizen earns 10 shekels of silver. The same procedure performed on a slave earns 2. But failure carries devastating consequences. If a free citizen dies under the surgeon's bronze lancet, the physician's hand is cut off. This graduated system of reward and punishment, scaled precisely to the patient's social class, reveals a society obsessed with calibrating justice to status. Judges convene in temple precincts, hearing testimony under oath sworn before the gods. Witnesses who commit perjury face the death penalty. A plaintiff who brings a capital accusation and fails to prove it dies in the defendant's place. The river ordeal persists as a final arbiter. An accused person plunged into the Euphrates, with survival interpreted as divine vindication. Women manage household estates with documented authority. Clay tablets record women buying and selling property, lending silver at interest, and initiating legal proceedings. Priestesses of the Naditu class, forbidden from bearing children, operate as some of Babylon's most active businesswomen, their transactions preserved in the cloister archives of the Temple of Shamash at Sippar. This is a society that believes order must be written, witnessed, and sealed, that justice without documentation is no justice at all. Every contract bears the impressions of cylinder seals rolled across wet clay. Every dispute generates a tablet that enters the archive. The sheer volume of surviving records, tens of thousands from this period alone, testifies to a civilization that understood something profound, that the structures governing daily life, from the price of barley to the rights of a widow, require not just a king's decree, but an entire apparatus of scribes, judges, witnesses, and sealed clay to endure. But the apparatus of scribes and sealed clay serves a power far older than any king. Behind every courtyard transaction, behind every weighed shekel and witnessed contract, stands the temple, and behind the temple stands the god. The Mesopotamian cosmos is not a place of comfort. It is a hierarchy of terrifying precision. Anu, Lord of the Heavens, presides from a distance so vast that human affairs barely register in his awareness. Enlil, king of the gods, dwells at Nippur in the Ekur, the mountain house, and his word is the storm wind that cannot be reversed. Enki, master of the subterranean freshwater ocean called the Abzu, governs wisdom, craft, and the secret arts that hold chaos at bay. Inanna, queen of heaven, fierce and unpredictable, reigns from the Iana precinct at Uruk, her power encompassing both erotic love and the devastation of war. These are not distant abstractions. They are landlords, employers, and the ultimate source of every harvest, every rainfall, every breath drawn on the alluvial plain. The temple is their house in the most literal sense. Deep within the mud-brick sanctuary, past courtyards where sunlight floods limestone pavements, past antechambers where priests prepare offerings, a narrow doorway opens into the cellar, a dim enclosed room where the cult statue stands. Carved from precious wood, overlaid with gold, its eyes set with polished stone, the statue is not a symbol of the god. It is the god's living body on earth, animated through the sacred mouth-washing ritual, the mispai, which severs the statue's connection to its human makers and binds it to heaven. Each morning, priests bathe the figure, dress it in fine garments changed with the seasons, and set before it meals of roasted meat, bread, beer, and fruit arranged on reed mats. The god eats, or rather, the god's essence absorbs the food's spiritual substance, and afterward the physical remains pass to the temple personnel as their sustenance. This is no mere ceremony. It is the mechanism that sustains creation. Mesopotamians understand humanity's purpose with bleak clarity. The gods created human beings to do the labor the gods themselves found tedious. Mortals till the earth, dig the canals, and feed the divine household so that cosmic order, the me, continues unbroken. Should the rituals cease, should the offerings fail, the gods withdraw their favor, and the canals run dry, the barley withers, the city falls. Temples therefore operate as vast economic institutions. The Iana complex at Uruk controls thousands of hectares of farmland, herds of cattle and sheep, fisheries, and textile workshops employing hundreds of laborers. The Temple of Nanna at Ur functions similarly. Its Entu priestess, always a woman of royal blood, serving as the moon god's earthly spouse, her residence a complex of administrative buildings and ritual chambers. Priests, purification specialists, lamentation singers, diviners who read the future in the livers of sacrificed sheep, and brewers who prepare the sacred beer all form a hierarchy as structured as any palace bureaucracy. The festival calendar punctuates the year with rituals binding city to cosmos. At Babylon, the Akitu New Year festival stretches across 12 days in the month of Nisanu, when the creation epic Enuma Elish is recited before Marduk's statue, and the king's authority is symbolically stripped and restored by the high priest. At Uruk, the sacred marriage rite enacts the union of the king with Inanna, ensuring fertility for land and people. At Nippur, Enlil's festivals draw delegations from across Sumer, reinforcing the city's status as the spiritual capital, even when political power resides elsewhere. Votive statues crowd the temple chapels, small alabaster figures with clasped hands and enormous, unblinking eyes, placed by worshippers to pray perpetually on their behalf. Their wide gazes are not artistic convention, but theological statement. They stand in eternal attentiveness before the divine presence, substitutes for mortals who cannot remain in the god's house forever. Thousands of these figures accumulate over centuries, and when space runs out, priests bury them respectfully beneath the temple floor, returning them to sacred ground. The ziggurat rises above it all, whitewashed mud brick gleaming under the southern sun, its stepped platforms ascending toward a small shrine at the summit, where heaven and earth are believed to touch. It is not a place of public worship, but a stairway for the god's descent, a cosmic mountain built by human hands on a floodplain that possesses no natural hills. Its maintenance demands constant labor, for sun-dried brick erodes with every season, and each generation must rebuild what the previous one raised. But the temple's house more than gods and grain? Within their precincts, and in the scribal schools attached to palace complexes, another kind of creation takes shape, one pressed not into offering bowls, but into soft river clay, line by careful line, preserving the oldest literature humanity has ever produced. The earliest Gilgamesh poems emerge during the third dynasty of Ur, around 2100 before the Common Era, composed in Sumerian by scribes who set down tales already ancient in their own time. 5 separate poems survive from this period, each an independent narrative. Gilgamesh and Huwawa, recounting the hero's journey to the cedar forest, Gilgamesh and the Bull of Heaven, Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the Netherworld. They are not yet a unified epic, but individual stories circling a single figure, the legendary king of Uruk, 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal, restless with a strength that overwhelms his own people. Over the following centuries, as Akkadian gradually supplants Sumerian as the spoken language of Mesopotamia, these poems undergo transformation. Old Babylonian scribes working around 1800 before the Common Era weave the separate tales into a longer, more cohesive narrative, deepening the relationship between Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu, the wild man created by the gods to be his equal. Their friendship becomes the emotional center, two extraordinary beings who find in each other the only companionship that satisfies. The standard Babylonian version, compiled across 12 tablets by the scholar-scribe Sinleki Uninni, sometime around 1200 before the Common Era, achieves something unprecedented. It shapes inherited material into a meditation on mortality itself. Enkidu dies. Gilgamesh, shattered by grief and terrified by the reality of death, wanders the earth seeking Utnapishtim, the one mortal granted eternal life after surviving a great flood. The flood account on the 11th tablet describes a boat loaded with the seed of all living things, birds released to find dry land, a vessel coming to rest on a mountain, a narrative that will echo through later traditions across the ancient world. Gilgamesh fails to win immortality. He returns to Uruk, gazes upon its mighty walls, and finds in the endurance of what human hands have built the only permanence available to mortals. The epic does not console, it confronts. But Gilgamesh is only the most famous thread in a vast literary tapestry. The Atrahasis epic, composed in Akkadian by the Old Babylonian period, narrates the creation of humanity from clay, mixed with the blood of a slain god, the gods' regret at human noise and overpopulation, and the flood sent to destroy them. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic recited annually during the New Year festival, tells how the god Marduk slays the primordial sea goddess Tiamat and fashions the cosmos from her body. Alongside these grand narratives, scribal schools produce an enormous corpus of hymns, proverbs, disputations, and lamentations. The lament for Ur mourns the city's destruction with imagery of devastating precision. Proverb collections offer sharp observations on daily life. Love poetry dedicated to Inanna pulses with sensuality and devotion. The mechanism of transmission is the scribal school itself, the Adubba, where young students copy literary texts as exercises, their clumsy early attempts preserved alongside polished master copies. Shelves of tablets accumulate in palace and temple archives, each text a node in a network of knowledge passed from teacher to student across generations. Reed styluses of varying thickness produce the wedge-shaped impressions that give cuneiform its name, and a skilled scribe can press hundreds of signs onto a single tablet no larger than a human palm. When George Smith, a self-taught Assyriologist working at the British Museum in 1872, first read the flood narrative on a tablet excavated from the ruins of Nineveh, he reportedly became so agitated that he began removing his clothing. The discovery electrified the Victorian world. A civilization buried for millennia had been asking the same questions about death, meaning, and the limits of human striving that every subsequent culture would inherit. The clay had kept faith with the words pressed into it, waiting through 30 centuries of silence for someone to read them again. The alluvial plain of southern Mesopotamia produces extraordinary abundance from its irrigated fields, but the earth itself yields almost nothing else. There is no timber suitable for construction, no stone for building or carving, no metal ore of any kind, no precious minerals. The civilization that invents writing, law, and monumental architecture does so on a floodplain devoid of nearly every raw material those achievements require. This paradox drives the most extensive trade networks the ancient world has ever known. Donkey caravans move in long files across the arid steppe, connecting the Euphrates Valley to the cedar forests of Lebanon and the Amanus Mountains. Each animal carries roughly 90 kilograms of goods, and a single caravan may include dozens of beasts plodding through dust for weeks at a time. The timber they bring back, cedar, cypress, and pine, becomes roof beams for temples and palaces, material too precious to waste on ordinary dwellings. From the opposite direction, through mountain passes descending from the Iranian plateau, and perhaps from as far as Central Asia, comes tin, the rarer component of bronze. Mixed with copper at a ratio of roughly 1 part to 9, tin transforms soft metal into the hard alloy that edges weapons, tools, and agricultural implements across the entire region. Copper arrives by sea. Merchant vessels hug the coastline of the Persian Gulf, sailing from Margan, identified with modern Oman, and stopping at the entrepot island of Dilmun, present-day Bahrain. Harbour quays at Ur receive shipments of copper ingots, carnelian beads, and exotic hardwoods. Dilmun functions as the critical middleman in a maritime network, stretching ultimately to the Indus Valley, where Mesopotamian cylinder seals have been found at Harappan sites and Indus weights appear in Mesopotamian port towns. The most coveted luxury travels the farthest. Lapis lazuli, that deep celestial blue stone adorning the headdress of Queen Puabi and the eyes of temple statues, originates exclusively in the mines of Badakhshan in northeastern Afghanistan, more than 2,500 kilometers from the workshops where Mesopotamian lapidaries cut and polish it. Yet Mesopotamia is not merely an importer. Its primary export is textiles. The Ur-3 state operates weaving workshops of industrial scale, employing thousands of laborers, the majority of them women and children, producing vast quantities of wool cloth. Administrative tablets meticulously record raw wool intake, labor assignments, and finished output. A standard talent of wool weighs approximately 30 kilograms, and the bureaucracy tracks every fraction. These textiles flow outward along the same routes that bring raw materials in, exchanged for the copper, tin, and stone the plain cannot provide. Silver serves as the standard measure of value. Weighed in shekels of roughly 8.3 grams on delicate balance scales, silver does not yet take the form of coins, but circulates as rings, coils, and cut fragments assessed by weight at every transaction. Merchants maintain detailed accounts on clay tablets, recording loans at interest, partnership agreements, and consignment arrangements that would be recognizable to any modern commercial lawyer. Metal workers crouch beside clay crucibles in open-air foundries, pouring molten bronze into bivalve molds to produce axe heads, chisels, and spear points. Potters throw vessels on fast wheels powered by kick momentum, producing standardized forms in quantities that suggest workshop organization rather than individual artisanship. Seal cutters work with bow drills and abrasive powders to carve intricate mythological scenes into cylinders of hematite, lapis lazuli, and carnelian no larger than a finger joint. This economic architecture endures for nearly a millennium, surviving the transition from Sumerian city-states through the Akkadian Empire, the Ur-III bureaucracy, and into the Old Babylonian period. It falters only when the broader Late Bronze Age system begins to fracture, when the trade routes that sustain it grow vulnerable to disruption. But for now, the caravans keep moving, the looms keep clacking, and the silver keeps changing hands across a network that binds the mountains, the sea, and the plain into a single interdependent world. In 1595, before the Common Era, the Hittite king Mursili I marches an army down the Euphrates and strikes Babylon with devastating speed. The raid is brief. The Hittites plunder the temples, carry off the statue of the god Marduk, and withdraw northward almost immediately, leaving behind a political vacuum. Into that vacuum step the Kassites, a people from the Zagros highlands whose language bears no clear relation to any known family. They have been present in Mesopotamia for generations, working as laborers and soldiers settling along the eastern frontiers. Now they claim the throne of Babylon itself, and they will hold it for over 4 centuries, the longest single dynasty in Babylonian history. The transition is remarkably quiet. No great battles mark the Kassite consolidation. Instead, the new rulers adopt Babylonian culture wholesale, worshipping Marduk and Enlil, writing in Akkadian cuneiform, restoring temples damaged during the chaos of the Hittite sack. At Babylon, Kassite kings rebuild the Esagila temple complex and lavish resources on its maintenance. They prove not conquerors imposing foreign ways, but custodians preserving an ancient tradition, and this strategy earns them legitimacy that endures for generations. Kurigalzu I constructs an entirely new royal capital, Dur-Kurigalzu, at modern Akkad, west of Baghdad. Its ziggurat rises from the flat plain in massive courses of mud brick reinforced with reed matting, a technique that allows the core to survive into the modern era, still standing 57 meters high. The surrounding palace complex and temples sprawl across the site, their walls thick with baked brick, their storerooms stocked with goods arriving from every direction. This is the age of the great kings, the late Bronze Age international system, and Kassite Babylon stands as one of its pillars alongside Egypt, Hatti, Mitanni, and Assyria. The Amarna letters, discovered in Egypt and dating to roughly 1360 to 1330 before the Common Era, preserve the correspondence between these powers in extraordinary detail. Kassite kings address the Egyptian pharaoh as brother, negotiate marriages of royal daughters, and exchange lavish gifts. Gold flows from Egypt. Lapis lazuli and fine horses travel from Babylon. Chariots, introduced to Mesopotamia during this period, become both instruments of war and symbols of royal prestige, their lightweight wooden frames and spoked wheels representing the cutting edge of military technology. Kuduru boundary stones emerge as a distinctive Kassite art form. These carved stone monuments record royal land grants, their surfaces covered with divine symbols, serpents, scorpions, and celestial emblems representing the gods who guarantee the transaction. They serve as legal documents and sacred objects simultaneously, placed in temples where divine witness ensures their permanence. The stability is not absolute. Border wars flare with Assyria to the north and Elam to the east. Tukulti-Ninurta I of Assyria briefly conquers Babylon around 1225 before the Common Era, carrying off the statue of Marduk, an act of sacrilege that Babylonian chronicles never forgive. Yet the Kassite dynasty recovers even from this humiliation, restoring its authority and continuing to rule for another 70 years. The end comes gradually. Elamite pressure intensifies through the 12th century. Around 1155 before the Common Era, the Elamite king Shutruk-Nahunte invades, sacking Babylon and carrying off treasures accumulated over centuries, including the very stele of Hammurabi, transported to the Elamite capital at Susa, where archaeologists will find it nearly 3,000 years later. The last Kassite king falls, and the dynasty that preserved Babylonian civilization through 4 centuries of relative peace finally dissolves. But the cultural continuity the Kassites maintained ensures that Babylon's traditions, its gods, its literature, its science, survive intact, ready to be inherited by the dynasties that follow. Far to the north, where the Tigris cuts through limestone ridges and the land rises toward the foothills of the Zagros, a different kind of power has been gathering strength for centuries. The city of Asher perches on a rocky bluff above the western bank of the river, its position commanding the trade routes that link southern Mesopotamia with Anatolia and the highlands beyond. Unlike the flat, irrigated south, this is terrain of rain-fed agriculture, of rocky escarpments and rolling steppe, a landscape that breeds a harder, more martial temperament. While the Kassites preserved Babylonian traditions through 4 quiet centuries, Assyria waited, constrained by the Mitanni kingdom that dominated Upper Mesopotamia. That constraint is about to shatter. Around 1363 before the Common Era, Ashurbanipal I ascends the throne and begins dismantling Mitanni's hold over Assyrian affairs. He corresponds directly with the Egyptian pharaoh as an equal, sending gifts of lapis lazuli and fine chariots, asserting a diplomatic status that Mitanni had long denied. When the Mitanni kingdom fractures under Hittite pressure from the west, Ashurbanipal seizes the opportunity, expanding Assyrian territory and installing a friendly ruler on the Babylonian throne through dynastic marriage. By the time of his death around 1328, Assyria stands as an independent great power for the first time in its history. The Ishtar temple at Asher receives lavish renovations during these decades. Its painted interior walls glow with scenes of ritual procession, the goddess rendered in vivid mineral pigments against plastered mud brick. The city itself grows denser, its administrative quarter filling with cuneiform archives written in the Middle Assyrian dialect, a language carrying the clipped efficiency of a state organizing itself for expansion. A century later, Tukulti-Ninurta I pushes Assyrian ambition to its most audacious act yet. Around 1243 before the Common Era, he marches south and conquers Babylon itself, carrying the statue of the god Marduk back to Asher as a trophy. He constructs a new royal city, Ka-Tukulti-Ninurta, just across the Tigris from the old capital, its palace decorated with painted reliefs depicting royal hunts and military victories. The conquest of Babylon sends shockwaves through Mesopotamia, but the triumph proves unstable. Tukulti-Ninurta faces rebellion from his own sons and is murdered around 1207, his new city abandoned within a generation. Then comes the catastrophe that reshapes the entire ancient world. Around 1200 before the Common Era, the Bronze Age collapse sweeps across the eastern Mediterranean. The Hittite Empire disintegrates. Mycenaean Greece falls into darkness. Egypt barely survives invasions by the sea peoples. Trade networks that sustained the international order for centuries dissolve almost overnight. Yet Assyria endures. Diminished, pressed by Aramaean tribal migrations flooding into the Jazira steppe, the kingdom contracts but never breaks. The city of Ashur holds. The temples continue their rituals. The scribes maintain their records. From this crucible emerges Tiglath-Pileser I, who reigns from approximately 1114 to 1076 before the Common Era. He campaigns with ferocious energy in every direction, pushing north into Anatolia, east into the Zagros, and west to the Mediterranean coast, where he receives tribute from the Phoenician cities of Byblos, Sidon, and Arvad. He hunts wild bulls in the marshes and Naragur elephants in the Kabur Valley, recording his exploits on clay prisms deposited in temple foundations. His armies deploy chariot squadrons with increasing sophistication, and iron-tipped weapons begin appearing alongside traditional bronze armaments, a technological edge that will define Assyrian warfare in centuries to come. Yet even Tiglath-Pileser cannot hold everything he seizes. After his death, Assyria again contracts under Aramaean pressure, entering a period of reduced power that lasts over a century. The kingdom survives as a regional state centered on its heartland along the upper Tigris, its military traditions intact, its administrative machinery preserved, its ambitions merely dormant. The foundations laid during these Middle Assyrian centuries, the professional army, the provincial governance, the ideology of universal conquest sanctioned by the god Ashur, remain embedded in the kingdom's institutional memory, waiting for the moment when resources and leadership align to unleash them upon the world once more. That dormancy ends in the 10th century before the Common Era. A succession of capable kings begins reasserting Assyrian authority over the upper Tigris heartland, rebuilding garrisons, securing trade routes, and pushing back the Aramaean tribes that had encroached during the long contraction. But it is Ashurnazirpal II, ascending the throne in 883 before the Common Era, who transforms Assyria from a recovering regional kingdom into something the ancient world has never quite seen. An empire built not merely on conquest, but on the calculated architecture of fear. His campaigns are methodical and merciless. Assyrian annals, carved into stone slabs with unflinching precision, record the flaying of rebel leaders, the impalement of captives on stakes outside conquered cities, the severing of hands and heads stacked in pyramids beside smoldering gates. These are not incidental cruelties, but deliberate policy, inscribed publicly so that every vassal and potential enemy understands the cost of resistance. Entire populations are uprooted and resettled hundreds of kilometers from their homelands, a strategy of mass deportation that shatters local loyalties, prevents organized revolt, and supplies labor where the empire needs it most. Tribute flows inward from dozens of subjugated territories: gold, silver, tin, iron, horses, cattle, textiles, and timber from the cedar forests of Lebanon. With this wealth, Ashurnasirpal undertakes a project of breathtaking ambition. He abandons the ancient capital of Ashur and rebuilds the city of Kalhu, known later as Nimrud, on the east bank of the Tigris. The northwest palace rises within its walls, a sprawling complex of courtyards, throne rooms, and ceremonial halls covering more than 2 hectares. Colossal lamassu flank the principal doorways, winged bulls with human heads carved from single blocks of gypsum alabaster, each weighing several tons, their 5 legs creating the illusion of striding forward when viewed from the side. Inside, hundreds of carved stone relief panels line the walls, depicting siege warfare, royal lion hunts, sacred rituals, and processions of tribute-bearers. The throne room blazes with painted plaster above the carved stone, reds and blues and blacks, rendering scenes of divine protection and military triumph in vivid color. His son Shalmaneser III inherits this machinery of empire and drives it further. In 853 before the Common Era, he marches westward and meets a coalition of 12 allied kings at Karka on the Orontes River, among them Hadadezer of Damascus and Ahab of Israel fielding 2,000 chariots. The battle is indecisive, though Assyrian inscriptions claim victory, and Shalmaneser campaigns repeatedly into the Levant without achieving permanent conquest. Yet the pressure is relentless. Around 825 before the Common Era, a black limestone obelisk is erected at Kalhu, recording the tribute of foreign rulers across 5 registers of finely carved relief. One panel depicts Jehu of Israel prostrating himself before the Assyrian king, the earliest known image of a biblical figure. The empire's reach now extends from the Zagros foothills to the Mediterranean coast, sustained by professional armies equipped with iron weapons, siege engines capable of breaching mud-brick fortifications, and a network of provincial governors reporting directly to the throne. Roads carry royal messengers across vast distances. Deportees populate new agricultural settlements. Tribute warehouses at Kalhu overflow with the material wealth of a dozen conquered peoples. The palaces themselves serve as instruments of power, their carved walls a permanent declaration that resistance is futile and submission is the natural order. Yet internal fractures appear even at the height of expansion. Shalmaneser's final years are marred by a revolt led by one of his own sons, a civil war that consumes 27 cities before it is suppressed. The dynasty survives, but the pattern is set. Assyria's strength lies in its military institutions, its administrative systems, its ideology of divinely sanctioned conquest. Its vulnerability lies in the succession, in the dangerous moment when one king dies and rivals within the royal family reach for the throne. For now the war machine holds. The Lamassu stand guard at Nimrud's gates, stone sentinels watching over an empire whose greatest and most terrible chapters are still to come. In 745 before the Common Era, a general named Pulu seizes the Assyrian throne and takes the ancient name Tiglath-Pileser III. It is a calculated act of legitimacy, but what follows is genuine revolution. Within months, the new king dismantles the old system of vassal states that had bred rebellion for generations and replaces it with something unprecedented in scale and precision. A provincial administration governed by royally appointed officials, bound to the crown by oath, connected by a network of royal roads along which mounted messengers carry dispatches at extraordinary speed. The empire ceases to be a loose confederation held together by periodic terror. It becomes a state. Campaign after campaign extends Assyrian authority across the ancient world. Damascus falls. The Levantine kingdoms submit or are annexed outright. Babylonia, that ancient rival to the south, is brought under direct Assyrian control. Tiglath-Pileser introduces mass deportation not merely as punishment, but as policy, uprooting entire populations and resettling them in distant provinces to shatter local identities and prevent coordinated revolt. The scale is staggering. tens of thousands of people are marched across hundreds of kilometers to begin new lives in unfamiliar lands, their labor fueling imperial agriculture and construction. When Sargon II takes power in 721 before the Common Era, the machinery is already built. He wields it with devastating efficiency. In 722, the Kingdom of Israel ceases to exist. Samaria falls after a prolonged siege, and 27,290 inhabitants are deported to Assyria and Media, scattered so thoroughly that they vanish from history as the so-called lost tribes. Sargon then turns his ambition toward permanence in stone. At Dur-Sharrukin, modern Khorsabad, he constructs an entirely new capital from bare ground. Massive walls enclose a city of geometric precision, and at its heart rises a palace complex guarded by colossal lamassu, each carved from a single block of gypsum alabaster, each standing over 4 meters tall, their serene human faces gazing outward with an authority meant to last forever. Sargon dies on campaign in 705 before the Common Era, and his son Sennacherib abandons the unfinished city without hesitation. Nineveh, the ancient cult center on the Tigris, becomes the new imperial capital, and Sennacherib pours the wealth of conquered nations into transforming it. His palace without rival stretches across the citadel mound of Kuyunjik, 71 rooms lined with over 3,000 carved stone panels depicting military campaigns in astonishing detail. The siege of Lachish in Judah, conducted in 701, is rendered across an entire room, panel by panel. Siege ramps rising against fortified walls, battering rams cracking stone, defenders hurling torches, families marching into exile carrying their possessions on their backs. It is war documentation of a kind the world has never seen, carved with a precision that borders on obsession. But Sennacherib's genius extends beyond conquest. Nineveh's growing population demands water, and the king engineers a canal system stretching 50 kilometers from the mountains to the city, including an aqueduct at Jerwan, built from over 2 million dressed stone blocks, carrying water across a valley on arches that anticipate Roman engineering by 4 centuries. Gardens and orchards flourish where dust once blew. The empire now stretches from the marshes of southern Babylonia to the highlands of Anatolia, from the Iranian plateau to the borders of Egypt. It is the largest political entity the world has yet known, administered through provinces, connected by roads, enforced by a professional army of unprecedented size. Yet Sennacherib's reign ends as violently as it began. In 681 before the Common Era, the king is murdered by his own sons within the walls of a temple in Nineveh. The palace reliefs endure in silence, their carved armies marching eternally forward, while the blood of the king who commissioned them stains the sanctuary floor. Sennacherib's successor, Esarhaddon, rules capably but briefly, conquering Egypt before dying on campaign in 669 before the Common Era. The throne passes to his son Ashurbanipal, who ascends in 668 before the Common Era as the most literate monarch the ancient world has ever produced. Raised in the royal court of Nineveh, trained not only in warfare and statecraft, but in the scribal arts themselves, this king can read Sumerian texts over 1,000 years old. He boasts of it openly in his inscriptions, claiming mastery of cuneiform signs that baffle even learned scholars. The North Palace at Nineveh becomes the seat of this extraordinary reign. Within its mud-brick walls, rooms fill with clay tablets, not haphazardly accumulated, but systematically gathered from temples, private collections, and scribal academies across Babylonia and Assyria. Agents travel to ancient cities carrying royal orders to copy or confiscate texts. Scribes in Nineveh duplicate originals onto fresh clay, pressing careful colophons at the bottom, identifying the source, the scribe, and the king who commanded the work. The collection eventually exceeds 30,000 tablets and fragments, organized by subject, omen series, medical compendiums, astronomical observations, mathematical tables, incantations, hymns, myths, and royal correspondence. The standard 12-tablet version of the Epic of Gilgamesh rests here, alongside the Enuma Elish creation narrative and lexical lists preserving the dying Sumerian language. Yet the scholar king wages war with the same intensity he brings to learning. Palace reliefs depict his campaigns with breathtaking artistic precision. The lion hunt panels stand among the finest works of art produced anywhere in the ancient world. Wounded lionesses dragging paralyzed hind legs, a male lion rearing in agony as arrows pierce its body, the king drawing his bow with calm composure from a chariot. These are not mere decoration. They proclaim the king's role as protector of civilization against chaos, the ancient duty of Mesopotamian rulers stretching back millennia. The greatest military crisis of the reign erupts when Ashurbanipal's own brother, Shamash-shum-ukin, installed as vassal king of Babylon, launches a coordinated revolt in 652 before the Common Era. Elam, Arab tribes, and Babylonian factions join the rebellion. The war drags on for 4 years. Babylon endures siege until famine forces surrender in 648 before the Common Era. Shamash-shum-ukin perishes in the flames of his own palace. Ashurbanipal then turns his fury on Elam, the ancient enemy to the east. In 647 before the Common Era, Assyrian armies sack Susa, the Elamite capital, carrying away treasures accumulated over centuries and devastating the kingdom so thoroughly that Elam effectively ceases to exist as an independent power. A banquet relief captures the paradox of this reign with unsettling clarity. Ashurbanipal reclines on an ornate couch in a garden, drinking wine. His queen sits opposite him on a throne. Vines and date palms frame the scene in cultivated tranquility. Hanging from a nearby tree, almost casually placed among the foliage, is the severed head of Tumen, the Elamite king defeated years earlier. Music plays, attendants wave fans. The juxtaposition of refined leisure and grotesque violence defines not merely a king, but an entire imperial philosophy, civilization maintained through absolute, unsparing force. The final years remain obscure. After 631 before the Common Era, the historical record dims. The empire Ashurbanipal commands still appears mighty, its provinces intact, its armies formidable. Yet the brutal suppression of Babylon and the destruction of Elam have exhausted resources and eliminated a buffer state against rising powers to the east. The library stands complete, its shelves holding the accumulated wisdom of 2,000 years of Mesopotamian thought. Within a generation, fire will consume the palace around it, but the flames that destroy will also preserve, baking soft clay into hardened ceramic, sealing the knowledge of an entire civilization into imperishable form for archaeologists to unearth 25 centuries later. The death of Ashurbanipal plunges Assyria into a succession crisis that no empire, however powerful, can survive. By 627 before the Common Era, 2 of his sons contest the throne. Ashur-etililani claims kingship in Nineveh, while his brother Sin-shar-ishkun challenges him, and the empire that once commanded obedience from Egypt to Elam begins tearing itself apart from within. Provincial governors sense the weakness. Garrison commanders weigh their loyalties. The iron discipline that held the Assyrian system together for more than a century fractures along every seam. In Babylon, a Chaldean leader named Nabopolassar seizes the moment. In 626 before the Common Era, he declares Babylonian independence, crowning himself king and rallying the southern cities that have endured decades of Assyrian repression. The memory of Ashurbanipal's brutal sack of Babylon still burns. Nabopolassar fights a grinding campaign through the Mesopotamian heartland, pushing Assyrian forces northward year by year, capturing city after city along the Euphrates and Tigris corridors. To the east, beyond the Zagros Mountains, another power consolidates. Cyaxares, king of the Medes, forges his tribal confederacy into a disciplined military force. The Medes have their own grievances against Assyria, their own memories of subjugation and tribute. Sometime around 616 before the Common Era, Nabopolassar and Cyaxares formalize an alliance, reportedly sealed by a dynastic marriage. Scythian cavalry from the northern steppes join the coalition. The three forces converge on the Assyrian heartland with a single objective. Sin-shar-ishkun, now holding the Assyrian throne, watches his empire contract. The provincial system collapses as distant territories break away. Egypt, once conquered by Esarhaddon, is long lost. The Levantine vassals stop sending tribute. The great Assyrian army, still formidable in pitched battle, cannot defend every frontier simultaneously. In 612 before the Common Era, the Allied forces march on Nineveh itself. The city is immense, its inner walls stretching nearly 12 kilometers in circumference, fortified with 15 monumental gates and fronted by a wide moat fed by the Kosa River. The palaces of Sennacherib and Ashurbanipal rise above the citadel mound, their stone reliefs depicting Assyrian invincibility. The siege begins in the spring. For 3 months the coalition hammers at the defenses. Then the river becomes the weapon. Seasonal flooding swells the Kosa, and the besiegers reportedly divert its waters against the city walls. The mud brick foundations, engineered to withstand human assault, soften and buckle under the relentless pressure of floodwater. A section of the wall collapses. Babylonian and Median soldiers pour through the breach. What follows is systematic destruction. The palaces burn, the temples are looted. The administrative quarters, where tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets line the shelves, collapse under flaming roof beams. Sin-shar-ishkun perishes in the conflagration, though the exact circumstances remain uncertain. In August of 612 before the Common Era, Nineveh falls. The greatest city of the Assyrian world becomes a ruin in a matter of days. A remnant Assyrian force rallies at Haran under Ashurbanipal II, the last king to claim the Assyrian title. Egyptian pharaoh Necho II marches north to support him, recognizing that a world without Assyria means a world dominated by Babylon. But the alliance comes too late. In 609 before the Common Era, Nabopolassar's forces take Haran. Ashurbanipal vanishes from the historical record entirely. The speed of the collapse astonishes the ancient world. Within 2 decades, an empire that controlled the entire Fertile Crescent ceases to exist. The prophet Nahum's oracle captures the sentiment of Assyria's former subjects: relief, vindication, and awe at the totality of the destruction. Nineveh becomes a byword for fallen pride. The mound of Kuyunjik, rising above the Tigris plain near modern Mosul, is all that remains. Beneath its surface lie the charred palaces, the shattered reliefs, and the baked tablets of Ashurbanipal's library, hardened by the very flames meant to destroy them. The empire is gone. Its knowledge, sealed in fire, endures. From the ashes of Assyria's annihilation, a new power inherits the ancient world. Nabopolassar, the Chaldean king who orchestrated Nineveh's destruction, dies in 605 before the Common Era. His son, Nebuchadnezzar II, ascends the throne already battle-hardened, having crushed the Egyptian army at Carchemish just months earlier. He inherits an empire stretching from the Persian Gulf to the borders of Egypt, and he will spend the next 4 decades transforming its capital into the most spectacular city the ancient world has ever seen. Babylon sprawls across both banks of the Euphrates, covering roughly 900 hectares. Thick double walls of baked brick encircle the city, the outer circuit running nearly 18 kilometers. The Greek historian Herodotus will later claim chariots can race abreast along their summit. The inner wall alone measures nearly 7 meters thick, reinforced at regular intervals by defensive towers. A moat fed by the Euphrates surrounds the entire perimeter. No army on earth possesses the means to breach these defenses. The processional way cuts through the heart of the city, a grand corridor paved with limestone slabs over a foundation of baked brick set in bitumen. Walls of glazed brick rise on either side, adorned with 60 molded lions in striding relief, their bodies rendered in golden and white glaze against deep bluer backgrounds. This road carries the statue of Marduk, patron god of Babylon, during the New Year festival each spring, when priests bear the divine image from the Esagila temple through the streets in solemn procession. The processional way passes through the Ishtar Gate, a towering structure standing approximately 14 meters high, faced entirely in glazed bricks of brilliant lapis blue. Rows of molded bulls sacred to the storm god Adad alternate with Mushusu dragons sacred to Marduk, their bodies rendered in golden, brown, and white against that luminous blue field. The gate comprises a double portal, its archways deep enough to swallow entire processions in shadow before releasing them into the temple quarter beyond. South of the gate rises the palace complex, where Nebuchadnezzar conducts the administration of empire. The southern palace alone contains 5 enormous courtyards surrounded by hundreds of rooms, its throne room decorated with glazed brick panels of stylized palm columns and floral borders. From these chambers, the king dispatches armies, receives tribute, and corresponds with vassal rulers across the Fertile Crescent. His military campaigns reshape the political map of the Levant. When the kingdom of Judah rebels against Babylonian authority, Nebuchadnezzar besieges Jerusalem. The city falls in 586 before the Common Era. His forces destroy Solomon's temple, the sacred center of Judean worship, and deport thousands of inhabitants to Babylon. This forced exile, remembered as the Babylonian captivity, becomes one of the defining events in the Hebrew scriptures and reshapes Jewish identity for millennia. Yet Nebuchadnezzar's deepest ambition is architectural. He rebuilds the great ziggurat Etemenanki, the temple tower sacred to Marduk, raising it in 7 stages to a height that dominates the Babylonian skyline. Ancient descriptions suggest a base measuring approximately 90 meters on each side. This is almost certainly the structure that inspires the biblical account of the Tower of Babel. Beside it stands the Esagila, Marduk's temple, its inner sanctum housing a gold cult statue of extraordinary value. Canals thread through the city, connecting neighborhoods and carrying trade goods from the river harbor. Bridges span the Euphrates, linking the western and eastern districts. The population reaches perhaps 200,000, making Babylon the largest city on the planet during Nebuchadnezzar's reign. When the king dies in 562 before the Common Era, he leaves behind a metropolis that will astonish visitors for generations. The blue-glazed walls still gleam under the Mesopotamian sun. The lions still stride along the processional way. The ziggurat still pierces the sky. Babylon stands as the culmination of 3,000 years of Mesopotamian urban ambition, the final and most glorious expression of a civilization that invented the city itself. Behind the gleaming gates and monumental ziggurats, behind the conquests and royal inscriptions, millions of ordinary lives unfold across the millennia in rhythms far older than any empire. The daily existence of a Mesopotamian farmer, brewer, or weaver changes remarkably little, whether the throne belongs to a Sumerian Ensi, a Babylonian king, or an Assyrian emperor. It is this enduring fabric of common life that sustains civilization itself. Dawn arrives over a residential quarter in any major city between the second and first millennia before the Common Era. Narrow, unpaved streets wind between mud-brick houses, each built around a central open courtyard that admits light and air into surrounding rooms. A typical dwelling measures between 50 and 100 square meters, containing 4 to 6 rooms arranged for cooking, sleeping, storage, and reception. Walls stand thick enough to insulate against the brutal summer heat, their interiors plastered with mud and sometimes whitewashed. Drainage channels run beneath floors, carrying wastewater into street gutters. Families of multiple generations share these compact spaces, with household authority resting on the senior male, though women manage domestic economies with considerable autonomy documented in thousands of clay contracts. The courtyard holds a domed clay oven where flatbread bakes each morning, pressed against the interior walls by skilled hands. Barley is the foundation of the Mesopotamian diet, consumed as bread, porridge, and above all as beer. Large ceramic vessels stand in shaded corners, fermenting barley mash into a thick, nutritious beverage drunk through long reed straws that filter the grain husks. Beer is not luxury but staple. Worker rations issued by temples and palaces routinely include measured quantities of beer alongside grain and oil. Dates from cultivated palm groves provide essential sweetness and calories, eaten fresh, dried, or pressed into syrup. Fishermen cast nets into canals at first light, hauling catches of carp and catfish that supplement the grain-heavy diet. Sheep and goats provide wool, milk, and occasional meat, though animal flesh remains a relative luxury for common households. Onions, garlic, leeks, and cucumbers grow in irrigated garden plots beside the canals. Beyond the household, the rhythms of agriculture govern everything. The flooding season of the Tigris and Euphrates dictates planting and harvest cycles. Farmers plow fields with wooden plows fitted with bronze or copper blades, drawn by oxen. Barley seed drops through a funnel attached to the plow, an ingenious seeding device described in Sumerian agricultural texts. Irrigation canals require constant maintenance, their banks rebuilt after each flood, their channels cleared of silt by corvée labor organized through temple or palace administration. children destined for scribal careers enter the adaba, the tablet house, where education begins in early youth and continues for years. Students copy sign lists, practice wedge impressions on small exercise tablets, and memorize Sumerian literary compositions even centuries after Sumerian ceases to be a spoken language. The curriculum is demanding, the discipline strict. Thousands of recovered school tablets bear the halting, imperfect signs of young hands learning the most complex writing system in the ancient world. Clothing consists primarily of wool and linen garments. Women spin thread using hand spindles, and weavers produce textiles on horizontal looms in workshops that employ hundreds, sometimes thousands of laborers. Textile production represents one of Mesopotamia's most significant industries and its primary export commodity. Cylinder seals carved from stone serve as personal identifiers, rolled across wet clay to mark property, seal contracts, and authenticate documents. Every transaction, from land sales to marriage agreements, is recorded on clay and witnessed. This world of bread and beer, of courtyard shade and canal water, of children's clay toys shaped like animals and tiny wheeled carts, persists beneath the grand narrative of empires. It is the true foundation upon which every ziggurat stands. A small clay tablet, barely large enough to fit in a human palm, sits in a collection at Columbia University. Designated Plimpton 322, it dates to approximately 1800 before the Common Era, and its surface bears 4 columns of cuneiform numerals arranged in 15 rows. For decades after its acquisition in 1922, the tablet puzzled scholars. Then the pattern emerged. The numbers describe sets of values corresponding to what later centuries will call Pythagorean triples, integer relationships between the sides of right triangles. More than 1,000 years before Pythagoras is born on the island of Samos, old Babylonian scribes already command this mathematical principle with fluency and precision. The intellectual architecture behind such achievement rests on a number system unlike any other in the ancient world. Where most cultures count in base 10, Mesopotamian mathematicians operate in base 60, the sexagesimal system inherited from Sumerian administrative practice during the 3rd millennium before the Common Era. 60 divides evenly by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30, making it extraordinarily versatile for calculation. Scribes use positional notation, assigning value based on a numeral's placement within a sequence, a conceptual leap that most civilizations will not achieve independently for millennia. This system endures invisibly in the modern world. 60 seconds compose a minute, 60 minutes compose an hour, 360 degrees describe a circle. Mathematical problem tablets from the Old Babylonian period reveal a curriculum of remarkable sophistication. Students calculate the areas of irregular fields, the volumes of granaries and canal excavations, compound interest on loans, and the diagonal of a square using a value for the square root of 2 accurate to 6 decimal places. These are not abstract exercises. They emerge from the practical demands of irrigation engineering, land surveying, and commercial accounting, then extend into theoretical territory that transcends immediate utility. The same empirical discipline shapes Mesopotamian medicine. Therapeutic tablets prescribe treatments organized by symptom: fevers, digestive ailments, eye diseases, wounds. Remedies combine botanical ingredients such as myrrh, thyme, and willow bark with mineral compounds, administered as poultices, fumigations, or oral preparations. Alongside these rational treatments, incantations invoke divine protection, reflecting a worldview in which illness occupies both physical and spiritual domains simultaneously. It is in astronomy, however, that Mesopotamian intellectual achievement reaches its most enduring expression. From temple platforms and palace rooftops, generations of scholars observe the heavens with disciplined regularity, recording celestial events on clay tablets night after night, century after century. The star catalogue, known as Mul Apin, compiled around 1000 before the Common Era, lists stars and constellations along the paths of Enlil, Anu, and Ea, three bands of sky corresponding roughly to northern, equatorial, and southern declinations. Many constellations catalogued in this text survive in modified form in the zodiac still used today. By the 8th century before the Common Era, Babylonian astronomers begin compiling systematic diaries, nightly records of planetary positions, lunar phases, weather, river levels, and commodity prices. These diaries, maintained continuously for over 700 years, constitute the longest sustained scientific observation program in human history. From this vast dataset, astronomers of the Seleucid period develop mathematical models capable of predicting lunar eclipses and planetary positions with extraordinary accuracy. They calculate the length of the synodic month to within a fraction of a second of the modern value. The knowledge flows outward. Greek astronomers, including Hipparchus and later Ptolemy, draw explicitly on Babylonian observational data. The zodiacal system, the division of the celestial sphere into degrees, the mathematical tools for predicting eclipses, all carry Mesopotamian fingerprints into the Hellenistic world and beyond. These tablets of numbers and star positions, stacked in archive rooms and buried under collapsed mud brick, represent something more than data. They represent a civilization's conviction that the universe operates according to patterns that patient observation can reveal and careful calculation can predict. In October of 539 before the Common Era, the Persian army of Cyrus the Great enters Babylon without a battle. The Nabonidus Chronicle, inscribed on a clay tablet now in the British Museum, records that the city's gates open and the population receives the conqueror in peace. The Cyrus Cylinder, a barrel-shaped clay document deposited in the foundations of Babylon's great temple, declares the restoration of displaced peoples and the honoring of local gods. Mesopotamia's political independence ends not in fire, but in quiet surrender. Yet the civilization does not vanish overnight. Under Achaemenid rule, Babylon remains a prestigious administrative center. Cuneiform scribes continue their work. Temples receive royal patronage. The astronomical diaries, meticulous daily records of celestial events, weather, and commodity prices, persist through Persian, Seleucid, and Parthian periods. Babylonian scholars at Uruk and Babylon refine their mathematical astronomy to astonishing precision well into the 3rd century before the Common Era. But the living culture slowly thins. Aramaic, written on perishable parchment, replaces cuneiform clay for everyday communication. Greek becomes the language of administration after Alexander's conquest in 331 before the Common Era. The last known cuneiform tablet, an astronomical almanac from Babylon, dates to 75 of the Common Era. After that, silence. The wedge-shaped script that recorded humanity's first written thoughts becomes unreadable. its meaning locked inside millions of clay tablets buried beneath the mounds of Iraq. For nearly 18 centuries, Mesopotamia sleeps beneath tells of crumbled mud brick. European travelers occasionally note the vast ruins. Then, in 1842, Paul-Émile Botta begins excavating at Khorsabad, unearthing the palace of Sargon II. Austin Henry Layard follows at Nimrud and Nineveh in the 1840s, shipping colossal Lamassu sculptures to the British Museum. In 1857, Henry Rawlinson and 3 other scholars independently decipher the same cuneiform text, proving the script can be reliably read. The ancient voices speak again. Leonard Woolley's excavations at Ur between 1922 and 1934 reveal the royal tombs with their golden treasures. The Iraq Museum in Baghdad assembles the world's largest collection of Mesopotamian artifacts. Generations of Iraqi, European, and American archaeologists piece together the full arc of a civilization spanning more than 4,000 years. The inheritance is everywhere. Every legal code descends conceptually from the principle that written law should govern human conduct, a principle first enacted in Mesopotamian cities. The 60-minute hour and the 360-degree circle carry the sexagesimal system forward through Greek astronomy into modern life. The zodiacal constellations mapped by Babylonian observers still define the ecliptic. The oldest literary masterpiece, the Epic of Gilgamesh, still poses its unanswerable question about mortality and meaning. The very act of pressing symbols onto a surface to preserve thought, the foundation of all written culture, begins on the alluvial plain between 2 rivers. Aerial photography reveals the Iraqi landscape, dotted with thousands of archaeological mounds, each one a collapsed city, a buried archive, a forgotten temple. Most remain unexcavated. The story of Mesopotamia is still being recovered, tablet by tablet, season by season, from the earth that preserved it. What began in reed huts beside irrigation ditches at Eridu more than 7,000 years ago became the template for urban civilization itself. The organization of labor, the administration of surplus, the codification of justice, the recording of knowledge, the human insistence on building something that outlasts a single lifetime. The land between 2 rivers gave humanity these tools, and humanity has never set them down. Thank you for joining this journey through the world's first civilization. If these stories have brought the ancient past closer, consider subscribing so you will not miss the next exploration into the deep roots of human history.